What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to Generation Zero. For today, I've got another one of my wish list videos. It's been a little while since I've made one of these because I want to give the devs a little bit of time just to implement their own features into this game without being like, add my ideas. But I thought that this idea here is a really keen idea, and due to some of the additions that we've had recently in the game, I think that it also gives a bit of credibility to this idea. So let's just jump right into the video here. So have you ever entered a city here in Generation Zero and wondered, where the heck were the police during this whole encounter, this whole experience of Sweden being taken over by robots? I know I definitely have. One of the biggest things that I think would add to these cities as a little bit of a storytelling feature would be to find the police on the front lines. In my personal opinion, I really believe that if Sweden were to be getting overrun by robots and if everybody was getting just kind of massacred, the first responders would definitely be police and paramedics in this situation. The military would definitely be getting to the cities as well, but I feel like in the cities there is an obvious lack of police intervention going on. So my idea today is covering how we could implement police into the game a little bit better and what kind of benefits and things they could actually bring to the game here. Some of the things that they'll be able to bring to the game would be new weapons and new equipable items. Alongside that, having more police bodies around a city would give you tons of lootable situations in a city, bringing you outside of the bunkers and getting you more into the thick of things and traveling around the world here in Generation Zero. So as of the May update, we saw the introduction of set pieces brought into the game. Set pieces are little scenarios that you'll be able to find in the world that will tell some sort of story. And alongside those set pieces, the introduction of a new lootable body type was added in the game, being these defeated police soldiers. I believe that if we were to see police activity in Generation Zero, it would be much more widespread. And on top of that, we would also definitely need some sort of a police headquarters, at least somewhere around the map, if not a few scattered around the map. So I've gone around on the internet and looked into Swedish police forces, looked into the equipment they use, and looked into a number of other things that will definitely bring a little bit of a spark of life to these cities. So let's talk first here about my idea for why adding more bodies to cities would be a good thing. I believe that if you were to add more police bodies and maybe add just a little bit more to their loot tables, they would be a very valuable source of a loot source. Alongside with them being scattered around, implementing more opportunities for us to utilize parkour to try to find various scenarios where you could locate a hidden body or locate a hidden weapon drop or anything like that, which we'll be getting into later on in this video, would definitely add to the value of exploring these cities. You would be able to go into a city knowing that there would at least be one to maybe a dozen good loot sources that you could wind up going through. On top of the added benefit of increasing the exploration value of going into cities here, I also think that it would introduce new opportunities to create a new building type in this game. The building type in particular would be a police department. And the cool thing about adding a police department is that, again, alongside the idea of police being the first ones to go out to the front lines and take on these robots, the police stations would be one of the first locations in a city outside of bunkers and any sort of military establishments that the robots would be aiming to take down first. So if they were to introduce a new building type of police stations, you would be able to then kind of tell out whether or not a city would have a decent amount of enemies based on whether or not that city has a police station. The thing about police stations in Sweden is that they're very scattered. So I think it would be nice if they added maybe only one or two police stations across the entire map so that that way they would be scarce enough to not be endlessly farmable, but also would create a kind of random value to going into a city and exploring a city. So the two locations that I think would be prime locations to place down a police department would be Ostervik and Hagaboda. These are two of the most developed cities in the game, having large apartment complexes and very clustered, focused amounts of housing and buildings together. The police department could kind of fall into the same vein as the apartment buildings that you find in the game, where it would be a small interior where you would go in and you potentially would have a middle floor that you could go through and find like ammo cases and potential bodies and stuff like that. And then it would have a lower section to it as well that would contain some sort of armory. And in this armory, you'd be able to get a couple items of unique loot. We'll be getting into the loot in just a second, but the idea is that the outside of the building would be swarmed by potentially maybe two groups of hunters and a tank, or a focus of maybe a couple tanks. I believe that the enemies in particular that should spawn around these buildings should be the Phoenix class enemies, as those are the strongest enemies, which would be going off and doing the real heavy lifting of the entire invasion of Sweden here. So by now you're probably wondering, what are these unique items that you're talking about here, Tenebris? And I've got maybe three items that would be unique to police buildings that would be very fun for the random chance of looting and finding them. So the number one thing would be the introduction of a new handgun. The handgun that I have in mind is called the Sig Sauer P226. It is the standard sidearm that all police officers use off in Sweden. It would add kind of a nice middle ground between the clock and the Magnus, as the Sig Sauer uses a higher caliber of handgun ammo. It's also, nicely though, interchangeable with 9mm ammo. So for the people that do not enjoy the Magnus for its low clip size, would have something as a bit of a different option to the clock in order to utilize their 9mm ammo. And then on top of that, you potentially could get a rarer drop of ammo, being the 40 Smith & Wesson, and that would mean that you could use the Sig Sauer against heavier enemies and larger enemies more reliably than the clock itself. So the next item that I think could be unique to these police stations would be a police bike skin. So the police bike skin could be a very low spawn rate, adding to the repeatability of going into these police stations, taking down the robots on the outside, and seeing if you can get lucky on the inside. The police bike skin could possibly have like less than 5% chance of spawning, but would be a nice little aesthetic option to add to your bicycle. On top of that, down in the armory, I feel like it would be nice if there to be an armory with worn to exceptional gear, green to purple gear, being the HP5, the 9mm clock, and potentially the 50 cal as well. So that way, if there wasn't some sort of new unique weapon, it would still be very useful for new players to go into the building and find themselves some decent weapons. And then lastly, there has been a lot of talk on the forums of an introduction of bullet vests into the game. And I really feel like outside of military establishments, there aren't too many places where you could really place a bullet vest in this game. So it would be nice if that potentially could be a thing as well inside of these armories. You'd be able to go down there, get yourself a bullet vest that has a ranging level of durability to it. And when that durability breaks, you would lose the bulletproof vest, but then after a certain respawn timer, you would be able to go back, get yourself a new bullet vest, and further add to your bullet resistance. If they were to add the SIG-SAR to the game, you could also potentially find the SIG-SAR on some of these police bodies as a random chance. That would be kind of a nice introduction into the game on the first island, as with the May update, the first island has gotten a lot more difficult for new players. So giving the new players an opportunity to pick up a potentially higher caliber handgun as a sidearm would maybe be a nice way of easing some players into the game. Now, the nice thing about this idea is that it's, in my opinion, kind of easily introduced into the game. They already have the asset for the police bodies, and they already have the asset for the apartment buildings. The apartment buildings would just need a little bit of an adjustment for the police department variant of them in order to become the building that you could go into. As well, adding some spawning locations around the buildings would be a nice way of ensuring a crazy firefight for the people that want to go out there and really thrill seek in Generation Zero. I also think that for one of the two police stations, or potentially a third police station, the Generation Zero team could easily set up a very difficult mission, and the reward to that difficult mission would be to get a special quality SIG-SAR P226. You could put that mission possibly as just a random world encounter or as a bunker mission, and the police department in particular would have a higher focus of enemies than even just the standard police departments, just for the mission alone. Now let's get into the stats that I think would make the SIG-SAR a viable option into this game. So I think that the SIG-SAR could be a nice middle weapon between the Magnus and the Clock, basically having a smaller clip or magazine than the Clock, and when fully upgraded with attachments and stuff, having only 18 shots, and then also having a damage of 6, being 1 point less than the 44 Magnus, and having a slower rate of fire than the Clock, being a 6 as well. I really think that the SIG-SAR would be a nice handgun because there's also a variety of kind of unique attachments that you could give to the SIG-SAR. One of which being a under the muzzle flashlight. This attachment would be permanently active, so every single time you pull out your sidearm, you would have a flashlight kind of light source from your handgun. But that light source could potentially be a little bit further reaching and stronger than the ordinary flashlight that you pick up in game. The other thing too, again, just adding to the world building, and this is just my own personal opinion, of course, but I feel like in a city you would find far less military style bodies because those bodies would be focused more around points of interests. Places being like the Normira artillery base, or any of the bunkers in the game, or anything really military like that. As well, then you would probably find the military forces more along main roads and stuff like that, where you would find the police more focused, as I said earlier, inside the city itself, actually standing there on the front lines trying to protect the civilians. So again, just like all of my other wishlist ideas, this isn't something that I expect to be brought into the game or anything like that. It's just something that I think would really add to the game and add value to the cities as well. Because currently, your best option is to just go off, loot a bunch of bunkers, go out, get into a firefight, rinse and repeat. But with this introduction, it would mean that you could reliably go into cities, restock your ammunition as you're fighting, undepending on what skills you have active, and it would just add to the whole exploration factor. And then also for us players that have currently beaten the game and gotten very far into the game, it would give us a fresh new reason to go into cities just to experience the thrill of a very large firefight. Along with the simplicity of being able to reutilize a few assets and then just be able to really focus on adding these new things that I've brought up, I think that that would provide a little bit of an easy development cycle. Again, I'm just assuming, as I'm not a video game developer myself, but it would potentially create a bit of ease and levity in developing this and bringing it to the game. So I'd like to know what your guys' ideas are on this whole police idea that I have here. Did you like the idea? If so, definitely let me know down in the chat. This is something that I've kind of been working on for a long time, but I'm trying to cut my whole script down so that that way I could keep things nice and viewable for all of you guys out there. Thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Until then, peace.